Hello everyone, my dear viewers. This video explores real-life moments where Americans confidently describe World War II as a story where they saved Europe only to face something unexpected. Silence, facts, and version of history that doesn't fit the script.
I was in a quiet museum in Vienna when an American voice behind me said, "So this is where we came in and saved everyone." No one reacted. Not even the guide. She just continued walking, like the sentence had no weight. That's when I realized something strange. In some parts of the world, confidence doesn't start arguments. It just hangs in the air, waiting to be corrected by reality. I was in a small pub in Edinburgh when a guy from Texas leaned over and said, "You guys must really appreciate us, huh?" I asked, "For what?" He smiled. "World War II. Not aggressive. Just casual. Like mentioning the weather." The bartender froze mid-pour. A man in the corner lowered his newspaper slightly. Nobody jumped in. That silence felt rehearsed, like everyone had seen this scene before. "Well," I said carefully, "we were fighting in 1939. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, preparing." I blinked. Preparing. Like bombs falling over London were a warm-up act. I didn't argue. I just asked, "Preparing for what?" He hesitated for the first time. Not long. Just enough for something to crack. The bartender resumed pouring. The man behind the newspaper didn't move. The room stayed calm. In Amsterdam, a tour guide was explaining the timeline of the war. Dates, movements, occupations. Then an American tourist raised his hand. "So when did you guys know we were coming?" The guide paused. Not confused. Just selecting words. "We didn't," she said. He laughed. "No, like when did you expect us?" She smiled politely. "We expected survival." The group shifted slightly. He tried again. "But like, when did it turn around?" She pointed to a map. Different places, different times. He nodded, unsatisfied. He wanted a moment. A turning point. A cinematic entry. Something clean. But the map didn't cooperate. It was messy. Overlapping arrows, shifting lines, years of movement before 1941. He stared at it longer than necessary, like it might rearrange itself into something simpler. That's the pattern. Not ignorance. Structure. If your education teaches history like a movie, you start looking for scenes. A beginning. A hero. A decisive arrival. But World War II doesn't behave like that. It stretches. It overlaps. It contradicts itself. And when someone expects clarity, reality doesn't argue back. It just refuses to simplify. That's what makes these moments uncomfortable. Not conflict, absence of resolution. In Prague, I met a guy named Kevin wearing a jacket with a small American flag on the sleeve. Friendly. Curious. We were talking about cities, then history, then the war. "We liberated this place, right?" he asked, gesturing around. I said, "Partly." He frowned. "What do you mean partly?" I pointed toward the river. Different armies came from different directions. He laughed lightly. "Yeah, but mainly us." I didn't correct him immediately. I just asked, "Do you know who entered Prague first?" He pulled out his phone. Quick search. His smile faded. "Wait. Soviets." I nodded. He stared at the screen longer than needed. "That's not what we learned." He didn't sound defensive. Just displaced. Like the map in his head had shifted slightly, and now nothing aligned the way it used to. I was in a dim archive room in Berlin, looking at black and white footage. Tanks rolling through rubble. A man next to me whispered, "American advance." I said, "No. That's the Soviets entering Berlin." He leaned closer. "Really?" The footage continued. Street fighting. Smoke. Silence. He didn't speak again for a while. Just watched. Like he was waiting for a different ending to appear. After a minute, he said quietly, "We don't really see this part." I nodded. Not as agreement, but recognition. Some stories don't get removed. They just get minimized. Cropped. Reduced to a sentence, maybe two. Enough to exist, not enough to matter. The footage kept playing. No narration. No explanation. Just images that didn't match the version he had carried for years. And that's where the shift happens. Not in arguments, but in exposure. When someone sees something that doesn't fit their narrative, they don't immediately reject it. First, they pause. Then they compare. Then they quietly adjust. Or don't. But the moment exists either way. That's the real tension here, not between people, but between versions of reality that were never meant to meet. In Paris, I overheard someone say, "Without America, this place would still be occupied." The sentence hung there, casual and complete. A French woman at the next table looked up slowly. Not offended. Just tired. "We were occupied before you arrived," she said calmly. He nodded, smiling. "Yeah, but you couldn't get out without us." She took a sip of her coffee. "We didn't get out alone," she replied. Not louder. Not sharper. Just precise. He laughed lightly, like this was a friendly exchange. Same thing. She didn't respond. Just looked at him for a second longer than comfortable, then went back to her book. No escalation. No correction beyond that one sentence. And somehow, that made it heavier. Because nothing needed to be added.
My dear friend, I think nothing could surprise me anymore. I was wrong. Write please your comment. What do you think about this?
In London, I visited a small war exhibit tucked between larger galleries. A man next to me pointed at a display about the Blitz. "That must have been when you knew we were coming," he said. I looked at him. This was 1940. He nodded. Right, early stages. I didn't correct him. I just asked, early stages of what? He paused. He looked at the timeline again. Dates. Events. Gaps. His finger moved slowly across the years. 1939, 1940. 1941, he stopped. Wait, I didn't say anything. He didn't need help. The realization wasn't dramatic. No big reaction. Just a quiet recalculation. Like adjusting numbers in your head and realizing the total doesn't match what you've been told your whole life. I was on a train in Switzerland, sitting across from a man reading a history book in English. Clean layout. Big title. I glanced at a chapter heading, "The Turning Point." I smiled slightly. "Let me guess," I said. 1941. He nodded confidently. "Of course." I asked, "Which part?" He blinked. "What do you mean, which part?" I pointed at the chapter. There were multiple turning points. He shook his head. "No, this is when it really changed." I didn't argue. I just asked, "Changed for who?" That's when the silence started. Not awkward. Just empty. Like the question didn't have a ready-made answer. He looked back at the page, then out the window. The train kept moving. In Rome, I joined a small walking tour. The guide mentioned Allied forces entering Italy. An American tourist raised his hand. "So that was us, right?" The guide smiled. "Partially." He laughed. "You guys always say that." She nodded gently. "Because it's usually true." The group chuckled. Light moment. Then she added, wars don't have single owners. He smiled, but slower this time. Yeah, but we did most of it. She didn't respond immediately. Just pointed at a list of divisions. British, Canadian, Polish, Indian. He leaned closer. Read the names. Didn't speak. No correction. No lecture. Just a list. And suddenly, the joke didn't land the same way. Because the names were still there, whether he acknowledged them or not. That's the mechanism. You don't destroy a myth by attacking it. You let it sit next to something heavier. Something more complete. And eventually, the imbalance becomes obvious. Not to everyone. Not instantly. But enough. The problem isn't that people lie. It's that they inherit simplified versions of reality that were never designed to be questioned. And questioning feels like breaking something personal. In Warsaw, I visited a museum dedicated to the occupation. Dark rooms. Low light. Personal stories. A man next to me whispered, I didn't know it was this bad before we got here. I looked at him. Before who got here? He didn't answer immediately. Just kept reading. Dates on the wall. 1939, 1940. 1941, his lips moved slightly. He stepped back, scanning the room again. Like he had missed something the first time. We don't really see this part, he said quietly. Not complaining. Not accusing. Just noticing. That's what made it uncomfortable. Because nothing in the room was new. It had always been there. It just hadn't been included in the version he grew up with. In a hostel in Vienna, a group of travelers started debating World War II over cheap beer. At some point, someone said, well, at least we finished it. I asked, finished what exactly? He laughed. The war. I nodded. Which part? He stared at me. All of it. I smiled slightly. So who took Berlin? He paused. Not long. Just enough. We did, he said, less confident now. I didn't respond. Someone else pulled out a phone. Quick search. The energy shifted immediately. Not dramatic. Just quieter. Like the conversation had lost momentum. No one argued. No one defended anything. The answer was there. And it didn't match the version that had been casually repeated seconds earlier. In London, I was talking to a guy who mentioned his grandfather fought in Normandy. I said mine fought in North Africa. He nodded respectfully. Different fronts, same war. Then he added, but yours must have been smaller. I blinked. Smaller? He shrugged. Less important. I didn't react immediately. Just asked, compared to what? He opened his mouth, then stopped. Like the comparison didn't fully exist when spoken out loud. I didn't correct him. I just mentioned numbers. Troops. Years. Casualties. Not aggressively. Just facts. He listened. Not defensive. Just slower. We didn't really go into that, he admitted. That sentence landed harder than anything else he had said. And that's the quiet truth behind all of this. It's not that facts are hidden. It's that emphasis is selective. Some events get expanded. Others get compressed. Until entire fronts feel like footnotes. And when someone finally encounters the full scale, it doesn't feel like learning. It feels like correction. Not of facts, but of identity. And that's always harder to process. In Berlin, I met a guy who had just come from a major war museum in the US. It's insane what we did, he said. I asked, what stood out most? He didn't hesitate. The liberation. I nodded. Of where? He paused. Europe. I waited. He added nothing. No cities. No details. Just a general shape. I mentioned specific places. Different timelines. Different armies. He listened carefully. They didn't break it down like that, he said. Not frustrated. Just observing. That's when I realized something important. It's easier to remember a single clean story than a fragmented one. Even if the fragmented one is closer to reality. Simplicity isn't accuracy. It's just easier to carry. I was at a house party in Berlin when someone heard my accent and smiled. So you're from the country we saved? It was said lightly. No tension. I smiled back. Which time? He laughed, then paused. Not because I challenged him, but because the question didn't fit the script. He opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. We moved to the kitchen, quieter there. He told me about his grandfather landing in Normandy. I told him mine fought in the desert. For a moment, the war wasn't a story anymore. Just two old men who never met. So, we didn't save you, he asked carefully. I said, you helped. He nodded slowly. That word felt smaller, but more real. In Washington, I walked through a large war memorial. Polished stone. Clean lines. Names carved with precision. A man next to me pointed at a section and said, this is where we turned it around. I looked at the map. Dates didn't match that claim. I didn't argue. I just asked, turned what around exactly? He hesitated. He scanned the display again. Slower this time. The war, he said, but quieter. I nodded slightly. Which front? He didn't answer. Just stared longer. That's what struck me. Not the mistake, but the pause. Like the certainty had been automatic, but the explanation wasn't. And without explanation, the confidence had nothing to stand on. That's where myths start to fail. Not when they're attacked, but when they're questioned calmly. Because myths rely on speed. Quick statements. Clean narratives. The moment you slow them down, ask for specifics, timelines, names, they begin to stretch. And when they stretch too far, they don't snap dramatically. They just lose shape. Back in London, I was looking through old photographs from the war. Black and white faces. Different uniforms. Different countries. None of them looked like main characters. Just people trying to survive. A friend next to me said, it must have felt like winning. I looked at the images again. It probably felt like not dying, I said. He nodded, slowly. No disagreement. Just a shift. That's what's missing from simplified versions of history, not facts, but weight. The sense that victory wasn't clean. That it didn't belong to anyone completely. That it was shared, chaotic, and fragile. And once you see it like that, it becomes harder to say we saved without pausing first. I don't argue anymore when someone says they saved Europe. I just ask questions. Not to prove them wrong, but to let the gaps show themselves. Because the truth doesn't need force. It just needs space. And eventually, if you wait long enough, silence does the work for you. Silence is where simplified stories start to feel incomplete. The strange part is how easily everything changes. One conversation. One museum. One quiet moment where the timeline doesn't match the narrative. And suddenly, the story isn't clean anymore. It's heavier. Messier. More honest. No single hero. No perfect ending. Just a shared outcome that nobody owned alone, and nobody should pretend they did.
My dear friend, did you like these stories? If so, like and write in the comments what topics you would like to hear the next stories on. Thank you. Subscribe, please. Bye bye.